when the HOA makes a special assessment and then somebody decides to move so that they're not necessarily subject to the ongoing special assessment. Let's just say they decided to do special assessment that was going to be $200 or $300 a month. My guess is, and I don't know if that's the way they work, but my guess is it doesn't help the value of the units in that development when you're selling because you don't like the special assessment. Is that correct?
Well, it kind of depends.
Okay.
It's always depends.
Okay.
So the first thing to understand about funding for capital expenses, like what you're talking about.
Yep.
Resurfacing project. Okay. That's a known entity. I mean, that doesn't sneak up on you. That's not a accidental damage kind of issues. The things like re-roofing projects, replacement of perimeter fences, milling of roads, those kind of things are all known. And so the board of a community should be well aware that expense is coming down the road, and they should be preparing for it.
Okay.
And the way they prepare for it is through planning and a document called a reserve study,
okay,
which is a plan for future expenses. Obviously, reserve studies don't include unexpected expenses like that pump motor burning up. They also don't include, unfortunately, they do not include lake dredging or siltation mitigation. Okay.
And that has been a big problem in Metro Atlanta.
They're not included because the engineering community considers dams and silting and stuff to be a 50-year horizon, and reserve studies don't include 50-year horizon items.
When you have a reserve study, it drives what should be a reserve fund, which in my opinion would be the equivalent of like a savings account for the HOA, where they're putting money out to the side, not leaving it in their normal operating account so they have it to use someday. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So let's back up just a little bit.
Okay.
The board of directors is charged with operating the community and creating an operating fund to pay for day-to-day expenses.
Okay.
That's the insurance, cutting the grass, all those kinds of things, right? They're also charged with maintaining reserve funds, okay? And what's in your covenants, and that's why I said it all depends, what's in your covenants determines what obligations the board has and how they'll go about that, okay? In general, they are supposed to set aside money to pay for the replacement of existing capital assets. That would be the clubhouse, the roof, the swimming pool, all the big capital at your streets.
Yep.
Okay? The gates to your community, they conk out. They're supposed to set aside money to pay for all those. And the way they do that is they develop a plan that's called the reserve study. And the reserve study is, in its simplest form, it's nothing more than a list of every item the association's responsible for. Okay, how much is it going to cost to replace it? When is that going to happen? Expected, anticipated.
Right. How long is it supposed to last?
Right. And how much money do they need to set aside every year to be able to have that money when that date of replacement arrives? Okay. And so if they're doing that properly, they should always have sufficient funds on hand to pay for any of those kinds of items. Now, your board psychology and the community psychology depends a lot on philosophy, depends a lot on whether that really happens. Some communities don't want to set aside 100% of the future expenses. They want to set aside a lesser amount. Okay? And I literally have seen everything from 100% down to zero, which to me, zero is kind of insane, but communities do that. They set aside no money. There's kind of a rule of thumb that you should have at least 70% of the amount of money that the reserve study calls for in the bank at any one time. Now, I don't agree with that. I think you ought to have 100% of what's expected to be spent that year. The problem with that is if you actually do get to a point where for some reason you would need $200,000, you've got to get that $60,000 from somebody. And as you pointed out, you thought, am I going to pay for this? You absolutely are going to pay for it. That's where it's going to come from. And so then the question becomes for communities is our community of a socioeconomic wealth level that big levies like that can be absorbed by the homeowners. And there are neighborhoods where, writing a check for $5,000 or $10,000 is, well, so what? And there's others where $100 a month is a lot of money for people who live there.
Exactly.
And for those communities, it's particularly important that they be 100% funded, so they're creeping along, keeping up with the anticipated expense.